That blows me away. Michael Saylor really says it. The US is going to become the bankers of the whole world. In a new interview that's really being shared a lot and going viral, he drops a bombshell and says that the US is going to become the new bankers of the whole world. And this is really, really important information that absolutely reveals and clarifies the strategy behind the US. A lot of people don't understand what this means, what was said in this interview. We're going to take a look at exactly what Michael Saylor said here, because this is really about strengthening the dominance of the dollar. At the same time, everything that Michael Saylor explains here is going to pump Bitcoin. Many people currently assume that the US dollar is weakening and will eventually be replaced, go to zero, crash, or whatever. But what's being prepared here, this strategy, on one hand, is going to massively push Bitcoin. On the other hand, it also means that the US dollar will continue to be strengthened. We're also going to take a look at a massive new statement from Dr. Markus Krall, who talks here about the current debt orgies in Germany and why this is so problematic and why we now have two different fronts here. On the one hand, the euro, which looks absolutely bananas, where things look absolutely bad with all the debt orgies that are coming our way. And on the other hand, we have Michael Saylor with his brilliant US dollar strategy with Donald Trump and all the people in the White House administration who have actually thought about something. This means that we are seeing massive idiots in the EU who certainly have the potential to cause the euro to devalue further here. On the other hand, in the US, we now have tactics like stablecoins, Bitcoin, and so on to continue strengthening the US dollar. We're now going to look at the massive clip here, firstly from Michael Saylor. Then I'll give the estimate, and finally we'll look at what's going on here in the Eurozone in comparison and why Markus Krall is so upset.
Bitcoin is the one universally acknowledged commodity. If we let banks in the United States use Bitcoin and custody it and sell it and buy it and loan against it, if the United States government begins to hold it in a strategic reserve, the beneficiary will be America.
So this is just the intro where he says, hey, in the US, banks can now hold Bitcoin too. And when banks hold Bitcoin, the US is going to benefit massively because right now, the issue has always been that banks had a hard time holding Bitcoin. But now, with the regulations in the US, banks are allowed to do this, and it's a huge price driver. Michael Saylor also mentioned that it takes 3 price drivers to shoot Bitcoin up to 10 million. The Bitcoin ETFs, fair value accounting, and the fact that banks are allowed to hold Bitcoin. We now have all 3 factors. Then he adds that the strategic Bitcoin reserve here in the US is also very, very positive for the US. These aren't exactly new developments. Michael Saylor has mentioned this in past interviews as well. He says that the big beneficiary, as he puts it, the major winner in all of this will be the US citizens. On the other hand, you have to ask yourself, okay, if people in the EU aren't investing in Bitcoin, are they going to be the big losers in all of this? Because the US would probably pull even further ahead of us. This means that the US is already superior in many areas, and with the whole Bitcoin strategy, the Bitcoin banking system, and the ability to back collateralized loans, this is going to push the US even further ahead while Europe gets left behind. But now we're really getting to the relevant parts.
If you could talk to President Trump and say, here's the one thing I would tell you to do to ensure that America leads the way in the crypto space, what would you tell him?
I would say he's already done the first thing, which is highlight Bitcoin as a store of value, as digital gold, and put the United States support behind a strategic Bitcoin reserve. The second thing is to support the creation in law of a legitimate path for issuers in the United States to issue digital tokens, digital securities, and digital currency. Because if American companies can create those digital assets, we will become bankers to the world.
And that's the really crazy thing that you have to understand now, where he's saying, hey, we're going to become the bankers of the whole world if these and these things happen here. He first responded to the question about what he would recommend to Donald Trump, saying that Trump has actually already done what he envisions, which is that the US now has a strategic Bitcoin reserve and is betting on Bitcoin. That's already a big win for Bitcoin. But the next piece of the puzzle would be for us to become the bankers of the world, and that can happen by issuing stablecoins and digital assets, as he puts it, digital wealth and so on. This means exporting the dollar globally. Right now, we have US dollars, but we're limited in how we can make them available. There are some banks that can issue accounts, but I've tried to open an account in the US, and it's not that easy. So it's not straightforward to get a dollar account. I mean, nowadays, there are simple solutions like Wise and Revolut that make it really easy. But if you want to open an account in the US itself, it's not that simple. But if there are stable coins, if there are any digital assets and so on here, and if that is perhaps partly linked to Bitcoin and so on, then it will lead to all banking here taking place via the USA, not in the form of some old school branches that you then go to, but in the form of stable coins and so on. And that's what I've always said. Overall, the whole Bitcoin and digital asset story isn't just about pushing Bitcoin forward. Sure, that can be a side effect, but mainly it's about strengthening the US dollar. And to further strengthen the US dollar, there are various ways. One way is clearly to rely on Bitcoin, and then deposit Bitcoin here to have a kind of collateral, Bitcoin collateral, where you have something on your balance sheet that is somehow valuable so that people can regain trust in the US dollar and so on. And the next thing is the stablecoin story, that you increase the demand for US dollars, because stablecoins are always backed by US government bonds, and that is what the USA wants, to find lots of buyers for US government bonds, because if there are no buyers here, then trust in the US dollar dwindles, then there are problems and so on. And as long as there are enough buyers, the dominance of the US dollar looks really strong, and that will continue to be reinforced. And that's why the statement from Michael Saylor is so significant and shouldn't be underestimated. On the one hand, it would mean that Bitcoin would continue to gain momentum here. On the other hand, it would mean that the euro would be in great distress. And on the other hand, it would mean that the US dollar would not go under in the next 2 or 3 years or so, but that the US dollar would continue to exist here for a very long time and would coexist with Bitcoin, and perhaps at some point, Bitcoin would replace the US dollar. But first, we're going to see a very, very long coexistence.
What does the future look like to you with Bitcoin, with cryptocurrency in general? Where do you see it 5, 10, or even 100 years from now?
I think big tech is going to embrace Bitcoin. They're going to let you hold your Bitcoin on your iPhone, on your Android phone. It will find its way into Microsoft software, Amazon software, Google, Apple software. I think that banks are going to embrace Bitcoin. So your bank's going to give you a loan against your Bitcoin. It'll buy Bitcoin for you. Insurance companies will start to support Bitcoin. I think families will increasingly begin to see it as their savings account. The yoga studio, the restaurant, the hotel chain, they'll be able to raise capital in order to improve their business and to innovate. And I think that sound money, that will spread through South America, Africa, Asia, it'll TREZOR China. So I think the future is American values, American technology, not just making America great, but also spreading economic prosperity to the entire world.
He's now talking about the future of Bitcoin, clearly stating that big companies are going to embrace it. They're all going to bet on Bitcoin. Apple, Google, and all those companies like Microsoft are going to offer products that include Bitcoin. Then the family offices will come, families will come, individual investors will come, and big investors will come, and banks will come. This means that a whole lot of investor groups are going to jump on the Bitcoin bandwagon because they'll realize, hey, they have a massive advantage using Bitcoin over fiat currencies. Eventually, it'll get to the point where people who aren't using Bitcoin will be at a disadvantage. Then all the different continents will follow suit, talking about Africa, Europe, Asia, and so on. So some people are later, e.g. Europe, some might be ahead of the game, like the US, but sooner or later, Europe will catch up too. And that's the tragic part, knowing that Europe will eventually have to catch up, because it's just a necessity, like with the internet. You can't just say, okay, we're not going to participate in this. Then it's really, really unfortunate if you understand, like Michael Saylor does, that this is a massive technology, but for example, Europe is closing itself off. And now we come to Markus Krall, who had a very interesting assessment of the euro, of all the debt packages that are now coming our way here in Europe and also in Germany, and why this could become very, very difficult for the euro, and why, on the other hand, as previously explained, the US dollar might not be doing so badly after all. I mean, bad is always relative because it's still depreciating and it's still not a great store of value, but compared to the euro, the dollar could definitely perform better.
I mean, if I print an additional 1 trillion euros, then the other countries in the Eurozone will think, well, if the Germans can do it, so can we. We're already at our limits everywhere. That can't mean anything good for the euro or for inflation rates in the future. What do you think about that?
So first of all, we need to put the trillion into perspective with our savings rate. We have a gross domestic product of about 4 trillion, just over 4 trillion, and we save about 10 to 11% of that. Let's calculate with 10% because it's easier. That's 400 billion. If I want to take out a loan of 1 trillion, 600 billion has to come from somewhere other than the savings of the German people. It's pretty simple, especially since that savings has already been used up in the past for things like factories and all sorts of investments for home builders, for real estate, for production technology, for research and development. Those are all investments. And that's where the savings of 400 billion per year have gone. And now the government says, but I need 1 trillion right now. So that means it uses up all the savings that are available, leaving nothing left for private investments. And how does that work? How are private investments being pushed out by rising interest rates? When this program was announced, the interest rates for government bonds jumped by 40 basis points in just one day. You could say there was a chainsaw massacre in the bond markets. And that's far from the end. If this program is actually implemented, we will see extremely high interest rates in Germany. And the only way to bring those down would be for the ECB to buy up bonds on a large scale, meaning printing fresh money, which will obviously lead to inflation. And this inflation leads to the expropriation of those who hold the bonds, both the new ones and the old ones. And that means it won't be the case that you just pull money out of thin air and then somehow invest it. Someone has to pay the bill. There's no such thing as a free lunch. There is no free lunch. That doesn't exist. And the result will be inflation, high interest rates, the crowding out of private investments, and necessarily also capital imports. We're going to have to go into debt abroad on a large scale. And all of this will bring the credit ratings of the Federal Republic of Germany down to Italian levels. You can easily calculate it. If we do this, we're already at the level where Italy was just a few years ago. And we all know how the spiral continues, and it doesn't bode well for the euro. The euro is already a failed currency. You could maybe hire Mr. Merz as the euro's undertaker.
Markus Krall is anticipating massive upheavals in the Eurozone. He even compares Germany to the lira or the euro to the lira, saying that we're going to become an absolute soft currency here. And the next thing that will happen here, which he has already predicted, is that the central banks will start announcing their QE programs again. I'm really curious to see what amusing names they'll come up with this time. There were always really crazy names, the PEP programs and everything else. And now in the future, it will be like that again. And now it will be like this. We are going into the next vicious spiral because all the debt packages also mean that, as has just been correctly explained here, the interest rates are going up and we inevitably have to bring the interest rates down because otherwise the whole Ponzi system that we have built up will no longer work. If there are no more buyers here, then we will either have to force people to do it. There is also the possibility that we could, for example, it forces pension funds to buy government bonds, or maybe it indirectly gets people to buy them through some kind of perks or something, saying, hey folks, you all need to buy these war bonds or whatever, because if we don't do this, it's going to go downhill. Then you make all sorts of promises to people. So either you frame or nudge people into buying the bonds, or you really force them like pension funds. And if that still doesn't help, then the central banks will step in and buy up government bonds endlessly. That's basically illegal state financing and nothing else. So officially, it's not illegal because they do it through shadow banks. There's a bank acting as an intermediary that holds like 10 government bonds, and then it goes one step further, allowing them to circumvent the illegal state financing that's actually not allowed in the Eurozone, which is a massive scandal. All the Maastricht criteria and so on have been broken, and then the central banks will step in. They won't just buy government bonds, they'll also lower interest rates, and then we'll have a massive soft currency in the Eurozone, and we'll probably see a significant depreciation against the dollar. But hey, feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you still want to buy Bitcoin and want a way out of this mess, then I'll give you a link below to 21 Bitcoins that will show you how you can easily and safely buy simple Bitcoin. With the code BitcoinHotel, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. They have savings plans, limit orders, one-time transfers, and so much more like auto wallets and lots of great stuff. Make sure to stop by, folks. See you later. Peace out.